Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Garcia, and the topic that I will be discussing today comes from Chapter 18 Psychobiology. This chapter focuses on understanding behavior through biological processes in the brain and nervous system. It represents a major shift in the history of psychology as it moves the field away from the abstract explanations of the mind and towards scientific grounded biological explanations of behavior. Psychobiology is important because it helps establish psychology as a legitimate science by connecting behavior to brain function. Psychologists were able to study learning, memory, and emotion using measurable and observable methods, laying the foundation for modern neuroscience and clinical psychology. The purpose of this lecture is to explain what psychobiology is, why it emerged, and how early researchers shape our understanding of the brain and behavior relationship. Throughout the lecture, we will focus on key historical figures whose work continues to influence psychology today. By the end of this presentation, you should have a clear understanding of how biological explanations of behavior and develop, and why the brain is understood as interconnected system rather than an isolated parts. So, what is psychobiology? Well, psychobiology is a branch of psychology that explains behavior in terms of biological processes. Rather than viewing the mind as separate from the body, psychobiology assumes that mental processes such as thinking, learning, and emotion arise from physical activity in the brain. This perspective marked an important turning point for psychology. It allows psychologists to move beyond philosophical speculation and instead of focusing on biological mechanisms like neural activity, brain structure, and physiological processes. Psychobiology emerged as psychology got to become more scientific. Early psychologists recognized that understanding behavior required understanding the biological system that supports it. Advances in physiology and brain research made it possible to study the nervous system directly. As a result, psychology shifted away from debates about the nature of the mind and toward experimental research grounded in biology. This shift helped psychology align more closely with natural sciences. With this shift came several foundational questions. Psychology began asking where memory is stored, whether specific brain regions control specific behaviors, and how experience changes the brain over time. These questions guided early psychobiology research and remain central today. Modern neurosciences continue to explore the same issues using brain imaging, clinical cases, and experimental methods. One of the earliest and most influential figures in psychobiology was Carl Lashley. Lashley studied learning and memory using animal models, particularly rats, to understand how the brain supports behavior. His primary goal was to locate the engram, or the physical trance of memory. Lashley believed that if memory had a biological basis, it should be possible to identify where it was stored in the brain. Lashley's most well-known experiments involved rats trained to run through mazes. After the rats learned the maze, Lashley removed and damaged different areas of their cerebral cortex. Then he tested whether the rats could still perform the task. He found that the rats' performance depended more on how much brain tissue was removed than on which specific area was damaged. This led to the principle of mass action, suggesting that learning and memory are distributed across the brain rather than localizing a single region. The principle of mass action had major implications for psychology. It helped explain why individuals with similar brain injuries may show different behavioral outcomes, and why damage in different brain areas can result in similar impairments. More broadly, mass action shifted thinking away from strict localization and toward understanding the brain as an integrated system. This idea remains influential in modern neuroscience and neuropsychology. Building on the idea of the brain as a system, Donald Tim proposed a biological explanation for learning. Him introduced the concept of cell assemblies, which are groups of neurons that became linked through repeated activation. According to Hebb, learning occurs when experiences strengthen connections between neurons. This provided a biological explanation for how behavior and experience shape the brain. Hebb's theory is often summarized by the phrase, neurons that fire together wire together. This means that repeated experiences lead to lasting changes in neural connections. For example, repeatedly practicing a skill or studying information strengthens the neural pathways involved, making the behavior more efficient over time. This idea laid to the foundation for the modern concept of the brain plasticity. Another major contributor to psychobiology was Roger Sperry, whose split brain research provided important insights into the brain organization. Sperry studied patients whose corpus callosum had been severed, preventing communication between the two hemispheres. His research demonstrated that the left and right hemisphere can specialize in different functions while still needing to work together to support normal behavior. When considering of the work of Lashley, Hem, and Sperry together, a clear picture emerges. The brain functions as a network. Gray matter is responsible for processing information, while white matter allows communication between brain regions. Damage to these connections can disrupt behavior even when the individual brain areas remain intact. This explains why brain injuries often produce complex and varied symptoms. This network-based view helps explain complex behaviors and psychological disorders. Behavioral changes often reflect disruptions in communication between brain systems rather than damage to one single region. This perspective is especially important in clinical settings where symptoms may not map neatly onto one specific area of brain damage. Today, psychobiology is closely connected to behavioral neuroscience and neuropsychology. Researchers and clinicians use brain imaging, cognitive testing, and experimental methods to study how brain systems support behavior. These approaches are widely used to understand neurological conditions, brain injury, and learning differences, showing how psychobiology continues to influence modern psychology. In conclusion, Chapter 18 demonstrates how psychobiology provided a scientific foundation for understanding behavior through biology. The work of Lashley, Hem, and Sperry show that mental functions emerge from networks of interconnected brain regions that change with experience. By grounding psychology in brain processes, psychobiology transformed the field and continued to shape modern research, clinical practice, and our understanding of how the brain influences behavior. Well, that concludes my presentation. I hope you guys liked it and enjoyed it, and thank you for listening to me and going over my presentation.